Thank you for joining us for this special conversation. We are counting it down to May 3rd and what happens to our lives post 3rd of May when lockdown 2.0 comes to an end. By now, viewers, it is sufficiently clear that there will be parts of this country that will see more relaxation. That the government currently is working on a plan, will include the state governments on that plan, and we will perhaps not have a blanket lockdown situation after 3rd of May. Suffice to say that the hotspots, the containment zones, including the biggest of the cities in our country right now, will continue to see a strict set of restrictions because they are hotspots and containment zones. But how do we go about opening up the economy? What's the kind of impact that we will see this year because of the lockdown? And what should the government do to help restart India's growth engine? That needs to be the big conversation point right now. Let's welcome Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, CMD for Biocon, joining us right now on this special conversation. Ms. Shaw, you have been batting for opening up the economy now for quite a few days. You say that it is time to now protect livelihoods and not just lives. Starting 4th of May, what do you think should be the priority? What sectors need our help urgently?
So, Tanvi, the way I look at it is that we cannot, wait any longer, because I think we've done a magnificent job of locking down for almost 5 weeks. And I think by delaying it or postponing it or extending it by another few weeks is not going to help. Because what we've done over these last several weeks has enabled us to assess the situation, to understand the risk, to mitigate many of the risks, and to manage the risk. Nothing can be zero risk, we must understand. And you must expect and anticipate that when you do lift the lockdown, there is going to be a surge in positive cases. But I don't think that is anything to be unduly concerned about, because what we need to do is to let our young workforce get back to work. What we need to do is to protect our vulnerable and elderly population. So they will need to again observe a quarantine or a lockdown or a semi-lockdown, whatever you want to call it. The young workforce should be allowed to get back into the workplaces. They have the inbuilt immunity to, fight this disease, and they will be the ones developing and building the herd immunity for society. I also believe that we need to start managing this disease at a district level. We should not be looking at it as one country, because as you yourself said, this is not a homogeneous country. Every state represents a country in Europe. So it is like being one big Europe with different states representing different countries. Each one of these countries has a very different disease burden. Each one of these has zones which are red and zones which are amber and zones which are green. Leave it to the states, and states in turn should leave it to district level administration to manage the disease through test, track, and quarantine. Of course, you need to treat the disease when the disease is severe. And for this, you will need to create and upgrade hospitals at district levels, convert hotels into semi-hospitals. And that's the way to prevent the hospitals from being overwhelmed. Hospitals must only treat severe cases and cases that need to be in ICU. The rest of the milder cases should be treated in step-down models where hotels are ideal.
All right. So let's say in this post-lockdown 2.0 scenario where we may have a graded relaxation, what should be the testing strategy? Currently, India is testing about 62 people per 1 lakh of our population. Do you think that's enough? And do we have enough kits to step it up from here?
Well, Tanvi, we do have enough kits. So let me not, get you into that feeling that we don't have enough kits. We have enough kits. What we need to do is to definitely step up the testing post the lockdown. And this number that you just mentioned has to be ramped up. I personally believe that we ought to be at least in the 200 per 100,000 levels of testing, because right now we are at the lowest level. And I think we can test at that level because we do have domestic kit makers who are actually ramping up their capacity. And I can tell you by mid-May, we will have adequate capacity to do over 100,000 tests a day. So, and this can be ramped up to even 500,000 tests a day if we so want by the end of May. So these are the kind of capacity building exercises that are going on. Of course, we need to make sure that private labs are brought into doing a lot of this testing, not by charging, but through some mechanism where where government procures bulk testing from these labs, and making sure that where we need to test, we do that. Employers also need to make sure that they start testing their workers in the workplace at their cost, not at the government cost. And we also need to make sure that wherever possible, insurance companies must also pay for these tests. There's been a lot of debate about these PCR tests and what they cost. But I'm happy to say, with a lot of indigenization efforts that are ongoing, these these test rates have already been more than halved. So I think I only see this price going down as we see more and more indigenization of these kits. In addition to that, of course, there's also been a lot of concern and debate about serological tests. Serological tests are also going to be important going forward. There is some concern about the specificity, but even that's being addressed, and we are getting indigenously developed serological tests, which you need to use in conjunction with PCR tests. And then you can actually get a very large map of community, test profiles. Our test
the other, point that I wanted to check with you. Yes, go ahead, please. Finish your point.
No, I was just saying that India has amongst the lowest test positivity rates at the moment. It's only 4.4. Okay. Yeah. So if you, it is only 4.4 per 10 per 1,000, as compared to other countries where it is much higher. It is like 20%, and in other cases, in countries like US, it is 18% in Europe, and it's even 8.8% when it comes to Japan. So what we are saying is basically 1 in 23 people are testing positive in India, and that's quite a low rate.
Correct. Ms. Shaw, my other question to you would be about the vaccines and the work that's going on in that zone, because no matter how hard we try via lockdown and testing and isolation, all of these measures will not make the infection really go away or solve the problem. How far away do you think we are for a vaccine for COVID, and especially a made in India vaccine? Maybe you working closely with some of those people who are attempting to develop a vaccine.
So, as you know, there are many vaccine programs under in the world under development. China has a couple of vaccines in the clinic. We have the Oxford University's vaccine in the clinic. We have a German vaccine in the clinic. There are 2 US vaccines in the clinic, and so on and so forth. Now, what is good news is that the Oxford Research Group is already in partnership with Serum Institute in Pune for actually transferring the vaccine technology to them for manufacture in India. So you will have a Make in India vaccine before too long. Fingers crossed that the vaccine turns out to be a very good vaccine. And if going by what we are hearing, you might have this vaccine approved for emergency use before the year end. But when you really think about these efforts that are going around the world, I think you will have many vaccines that are going to be able to be given to communities and to global populations before too long, because I think emergency use is what everybody is talking about, and that could happen before the year end. But I think to really get a fully approved vaccine is going to take at least a year more. So I think that's what you have to be cognizant of. As far as Indian vaccine efforts are concerned, these
So,
have all been efforts from small biotech companies. They have now been paired off with larger companies. But before they enter the clinic, it's going to take at least 9 months. So I don't think the truly invented in India, made in India vaccine is going to appear before 1.5 years.
So, can you just explain this a little bit more, for our viewers? What would we, how do you differentiate an emergency vaccine then what would effectively go through the whole process, the clinical trials, and be in the market a year later? What is the process for this emergency vaccine?
So, Tanvi, when you do a clinical development of a vaccine, first you do the lab in vitro, as we call it, studies to show that the vaccine will work. After that, you put it into animal studies where you want to see whether these animals are also responding to the vaccine that you have developed. And you actually do what is called as challenge testing, which means you vaccinate animals and then actually introduce the virus into these animals and see if they are withstanding the virus, and they're killing the virus. So that's the animal testing phase. And then you basically start with human clinical trials. And right now, what everyone is in is what they call phase 1, phase 2 studies. In phase 1, phase 2 studies, what you need to do is to first evaluate the safety of these vaccines. So you do it in healthy volunteers who are pretty healthy, and you give them this shot of vaccine to see how they are responding in terms of their own antibody response to these vaccines. And then you basically start looking at efficacy and start seeing how long is this antibody response lasting for. What is the antibody titer looking like for these people who have been vaccinated, and so on and so forth. And once you start seeing that, yes, this is a level which can actually kill the virus or withstand the virus, then you start allowing a larger number of people in a phase 3 trial to start being immunized. Now, when you start looking at data and you start seeing very, very good data coming out in early phase 3, then you can, once you've sort of inoculated at least a few thousand people and you see that, oh, they're all developing very nice immune responses, then there is something called an emergency use approval, which is like a conditional approval saying that as long as the rest of the trial goes well, you can actually start giving this as a vaccine outside the trial to many patients who might need it. For instance, we are saying that our vulnerable people, people over the age of 60, are the ones who really need this vaccine, right? You might also say the health workers are the first lot who should be given this vaccine to immunize them who are treating COVID patients. So everyone is saying, let's immunize our health workers first. If that is the case, then in the emergency use, you can actually start looking at health workers and other vulnerable populations, and even your young workforce. And if they start also showing a good immune response, and then once the trial is over, because like I told you, you have to assess a lot of things about the vaccine. So it's only over a year will you really realize how the antibody is enduring, how it is basically retaining its efficacy in the body. And once all that is proven, they will get a final approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, for shedding light on that very important issue and joining us right now as we begin the conversation and continue the conversation on opening up of the economy post lockdown 2.0. I appreciate you taking the time out. Thank you.